Map out your pricing touch points with marketing, supply chain, finance, everyone. And then figure out how your pricing should operate in the organization.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Jennings Executive Search. I had a great conversation with John Jennings about the skills needed in different pricing roles. He and I think a lot alike. If you're looking for a new pricing role, or if you're trying to hire just the right pricing person, I strongly suggest you reach out to Jennings Executive Search. They specialize in placing pricing people. Say that 3 times fast. Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the enabled relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and our guest today is Karan Sood, and here are 3 things you want to know about Karan before we start. He is currently Director of Sales Operation at Rakuten Kobo. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He is the Global Director of Pricing, was the Global Director of Pricing at Iovate Health Sciences, and he's been in pricing at the Yellow Pages, at Mitsubishi, at GM. He's had a fabulous experience. Welcome, Karan.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Hey, how did you get into pricing?
Funny story. Dates back to 2007. I was doing my MBA at University of Windsor here in Canada, and we were supposed to find our first internship for the summer and beyond. And I did not find one. I did not find one for the longest time. New in the country, still finding my wheels. And then somehow one day, General Motors stumbled in the university looking for interns because their choice of college, they were too late. So we interviewed, a couple of us, and we interviewed for just financial analyst jobs. And then we got it. And then when I read my cover letter, it said, when my offer letter said pricing analyst. And I was like, okay, pricing must be something we do in financial analysis. And that's how I got my break in pricing at GM. Worked there for almost a year and a half after that. And then like one thing after another, I was looking for pricing jobs one after another, then went on to work at Mitsubishi and then Yellow Pages. And as you said, Iovate and now. So it was a chance career. I was not looking for a job in pricing. It just happened to be, but I'm glad it took me into that path. That has been very rewarding and and a great learning experience. I've worked with several people in the org.
Nobody ever looks for a job in pricing or for their first job in pricing. Ever.
Yeah, like never, right? It didn't exist. And this is like, now people say a lot about, hey, there's a university degree in pricing and, Tim's worked on some stuff with universities and all that kind of fun stuff. But 2007, no. The only thing when I Googled pricing after I got a job at that time was this one course at, I can't remember if it was some MIT or something. That was just an online course that was offered in pricing at that point. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll read up on that. But that was it, because no one went to school for pricing. Philip Kotler's book had like 4 pages on pricing in the marketing mix book, right? Like, so it was an eye opener once you get in there and they're like, hey, we got to talk about pricing life cycle. We got to talk about parts pricing. We got to talk about engine pricing and so on and so forth. And it was fascinating and very archaic at the same time in automotive. So yeah, it's how I landed in pricing.
So why did you stay? Out of curiosity. So you ended up at GM, you did your internship. So you've tasted pricing, but you weren't really a pricing person yet.
No, I was not. And that's another funny story. So I was looking for a job. Then after GM, I was looking for, this was GM at the height of the 2007, 2008 auto downturn, right? So 2008, the contract was no longer renewed. It was done. And then I was looking for my next role. And then I was like, no, I want to work in something flashy, strategy and marketing. That's where I'm going to go. So I go to this marketing analyst role at Mitsubishi for an interview. Halfway through the interview, the interviewer, Kirk Merritt, stopped me and he's like, you know what? Maybe this is not the role for you, but we have another role opening up because we are starting our parts distribution center in Canada and we need a pricing analyst. And I was like, maybe that was his polite way of saying that, hey, your interview didn't go well, so let's just call it a day. So like, okay, sure. And 3 days later, he calls me, and next day he brings me in front of the director for supply chain at that time, and I got the next pricing role. And I was like, you know what? It has to be some sort of serendipity that I got called in for an interview and they offered me a role that I didn't want, so maybe I might as well try. So yeah, so that's how I landed in the second role landed in pricing, and then after that I think it was a flywheel effect after that. Like once you have the experience and it's a niche, and it felt like there were not a lot of roles, but the roles that were there were quite were nice and had some good visibility and good elements to it. So I then stayed.
Okay, so let's jump to a slightly different topic, but very related. You said when you went to get your second job, you really wanted to work in strategy and marketing. You have to admit that what you do today in pricing is a lot like strategy and marketing.
Oh, it only came full circle back after a few years. Like, in fact, I would say Yellow Pages after that was a good learning experience. Like, it was 6 years, and you're in an industry that is declining. The print industry was declining. Online is increasing. And that time we sort of got my cross-functional hat going in terms of like, hey, how do we work with marketing for new products? How do you work with supply chain for older products that are discontinuing? How to make sure that we don't print too much and we have the right size and everything. So it's only then I realized over time how cross-functional this is. And now I say a slightly controversial statement that people don't like sometimes. It triggers a lot of people. It's like, hey, pricing sits at the heart of the organization in a way, because you remember, like, you got sales, you got product. Product can only happen after you basically said that, hey, the value and the pricing equation will make sense, so let's make the product. And then you go to finance to get the cost, which is a very cross-functional area, right? And then you go to supply chain to figure out your forecast and demand, which is again a function of price. And then you go to sales, who's selling, which is again a function of price, because you got to give them the value story, you got to give them the sales technique. So there's marketing coming in, and then customer success. You to call it anyone. Like, it's hard for me to not, at this point in my career, it's hard for me to not pinpoint it at any role in an organization and say, hey, let me figure out what the pricing touch point with that person is, because I think that there's always is. I can hardly figure out like when there's no touch point. So that is like slightly controversial, because people sometimes think I'm a little bit cuckoo saying that, but I stand by it.
So although I might have described it slightly differently, I agree completely. But why is it that pricing is so underrepresented when it really and truly should be the heart of the company?
I think my belief is, and I have 2 points that I feel that are I think the academic research into pricing going into like 2000 wasn't there. Didn't happen in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s. Not a lot of research happened until Robert Dolan came out and said, hey, value-based selling is what we're going to do. And this is how value-based selling will work. You got to figure out what the total economic value is and, perceived value is. And then we got to figure out a way to sell it and then increase your perceived value to the economic value. Same with Thomas Nagel and everyone. I think they came in a bit late, and that sort of never created that base for marketing. There's oodles of research on finance and product and marketing. You can go open a journal back to 1925 and have lots of marketing research and everything. I think pricing didn't happen because it was so cost based. There was none of this only like, okay, you can expedite this and you can do this, and so that happened. I think that probably didn't give us the right base. And second, which I think is the bigger reason, is pricing roles are tapping out a level below where they should. In most organizations, and this is what I've seen so far, you can hear, like, I'm in Canada, I can count the number of chief pricing officers that are there in my one hand, maybe in a couple of fingers. If you expand that to globally, US has done pretty much a better job at having a sort of a chief pricing evangelist in some cases. But I think most pricing roles are tapping out as senior manager of pricing, reporting to someone in marketing, or at best a director of pricing in some organization that is also reporting, has a reporting structure that's either weird, reporting into finance or reporting into marketing, or sometimes even reporting to sales. So I think that creates a little bit of a lack of true ownership, because when you don't have an exec that fully understands the ins and outs of pricing and ins and outs of how it impacts the business, you're not going to get a seat at the table. And that is definitely something I suffered early on in the career, that, hey, how do I find that voice and find that muscle to go up against like C-suite? In fact, like I've left jobs because I didn't agree with the C-suite on pricing strategy. So, yeah, I think that is one of the bigger hurdles. And I see that there's good work being done on that, but we still have a lot to do.
I find it fascinating that every department cares a lot about pricing, but nobody truly understands it well, which is pretty fascinating, right? So as a pricing person, we have to make the VP of sales happy, and we have to make the VP of product happy, and we have to make the VP of marketing happy, right? Yeah. And so it's really challenging from that perspective, and yet we tend not to have the VP title or the chief pricing officer title.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Because I feel like they think the role is not meaty enough in itself. Because, there's, when you talk about VP of pricing, it also actually gives it a bad rep, because VP of pricing is also VP of a lot of other things that happen in the organization. You got to talk about sales operations, sales enablement. If you don't have a good sales enablement, VP of pricing might be your sales enablement guy in terms of getting your value story in, getting it to the customer, getting it to the right places, customer success. So I think that impacts that a little bit. So that's my take on that.
Yeah. So I often think that when I tell people I'm a pricing expert, which by the way, I've stopped saying, right? But when I tell people I'm a pricing expert, they think, oh, you put a number on a product, right? And that's what pricing is. And it turns out it is so much more than that.
Oh.
And so as long as people are thinking that small little thing, then there's no real, why would you have a VP of someone putting a number on a product?
Yeah, I think the number of times people have thought, I'm coming in a meeting, I'm going to open up a spreadsheet, and in like cell C8, I'm going to have a magic number that's going to solve everyone's problem. And I'm like, sorry to disappoint you, but I have a story to tell you. Right. So it's that thing, right? Like, because pricing was always so much cost-based early on for years, right? Like cost-based, and you enter a cost into a spreadsheet, you're going to enter a margin number and going to get a price. That was what it was, right? So, and that created this bad rep that, hey, it's just going to be a financial number. We're just going to crunch some numbers and kind of come up with that story. And now I have to sort of dial everyone's expectation back that, hey, pricing analysis is a part of it, but we got to figure out a whole lot of other stuff in terms of what are we selling, where are we selling, can we bear the cost of doing it? Can we do this? Do we have the demand to do it? Do we have the supply to do it? And then what are we putting into that value story? So it is very cross-functional, and it rubs people off the wrong way. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think so. There's more friction. There's more friction in my role than I've seen in any other role that I closely work with, because it's so cross-functional, and it goes into like when we go into meeting with marketing saying, let's talk about value stories, and they don't feel like you're stepping into their toes. When you go to finance and talk about cost structure to sort of what kind of cost structure will support a new product, it again feels like you're stepping into their toes, so which no one likes, right? So it's a very hard one to balance as to how to go about navigating this maze that people in pricing have to work with. And I just came back from LA at the Pricing Summit USA this year. And I can tell you that was number one reason in everyone's mind, front and center. Not that pricing has this friction role that is omnipresent at all times. Like, how do you reduce this friction? And I think we have got a lot of work to that in that respect.
Yeah, very interesting. So you currently are in sales operations. You're running a sales operations team.
Yeah.
Go ahead and tie together how you move from pricing to sales enablement and why that makes sense.
So, yeah. So at the end of the day, like the sales and what people sell, right, is something that where you have created something that has some value. And you have to figure out where are you going to sell it, what price are you going to sell it in different channels, how are you going to basically maximize your willingness to pay in different channels, different geographies. And so that's where, and then you also have to sort of decide how much you're going to sell and what kind of hurdles you're going to have in each channel. So as a pricing guy, right, the number one thing we have to always figure out is, okay, what's the price, what's the story, where are we going to sell them, and how much we're going to make. And that all have, a lot of that has sales touch points, right? We understand that. And then, but there's also a lot of operations touch point in there as well, right? Like supply chain comes in there, finance comes in there. So I think it's always required, right? Like to take, who's taking the sales story to the sales guys. If you don't have a strong sales enablement team, then you will struggle. So I'll tell you, going back to my days at Yellow Pages, you are going from a print environment to an online world. Print directories to online, right? Like everyone, we are discontinuing the use or minimizing the use of directories while still having them around to pay the bills, and then going into online world where we are selling clicks and search and website products and so on and so forth. And that was not a pricing exercise per se. Sure, pricing is one element of it, but that was a change management and sales enablement exercise, because you have these sales guy walking into a plumber's office and saying, hey, guess what? We're going to discontinue the directory in a couple of years, and it's going to decline like this. But we got you on this new online program that we want to sell you. And they're like, hey, okay, I know nothing about online. I know everything about my page, my product being front and center on the front page of a directory. And that's how I measure my calls. And then then we basically moved to the notion of, okay, let's create value stories. So we went and created thousands of value stories for people who are buying online product, what kind of results they're getting, how many calls they're getting. So this is how granular we got in that sales enablement and sales operations world. And there was that. So if you are a plumber, you got an online ad with us, we'll tell you how many calls you'll get, what will be the average duration of those calls, how many of those calls will close. Let's say 50% of the calls, if you get 10 calls, 50% of the calls will close. 5, and those 5 calls are worth $500 each to you. So that's $2,500. And we create these value stories for everyone to take along with them. And that's where pricing and sales enablement and marketing sort of come into play together as to create those value stories, right? And you have to support, I think, like sending your sales guys without any good sales enablement and sales operation and sales and value management stories to this field is like sending a soldier to the battlefield without a rifle. Like how do you prevent that pushback? How do you support them? Because sales doesn't end where you give someone a product to sell. That's almost where it starts. So I think sales enablement and operations play the key role, and we in sales operation feel we piggyback the whole process between sales and marketing and finance. Because you have directives coming from all places. You have directives coming from the execs and strategy and marketing. And now we got to take it all in and still try and balance what results we can deliver while still making sure that we have the product that to deliver and the supply to deliver. Who else is going to live in their world? Supply chain is not going to live in the sales world day in, day out. They're in fact not even talking to the customer or anyone. It's the sales guys, and sales guys, the first line of feedback that comes back is to sales enablement as to what went wrong during the day, what went wrong during the month. And it's our job to then take it to the rest of the organization and sort of craft the strategy or the narrative.
Love that answer. I'm going to say what you said in a different way and put it in a slightly different perspective, if I may. So when we're in pricing, I always think of pricing's job is really to make sure the company understands the value of the products, right? So who's buying it and how much do they value it? And so if we can do that really well, then it turns out that we should be holding the hands of product management and product teams so they build products that actually have value. Yeah. And we should be holding the hands of marketing so that when they put out marketing programs, they're actually talking about value. And we should be holding the hands of salespeople so that when they go talk to customers, they're able to communicate value. And so here's these 3 big pieces where we've got to help the company. And what you just said to me is, hey, the sales side is so important, which it is, there's no doubt, that I'm taking what I know right now and focusing it on sales. and we're going to let product and marketing, struggle along. We'll help them a little bit, but we're focusing on sales right now.
No, I wouldn't. So, because you cut off for a second, I wouldn't say that we were basically say, hey, sales is the most important part of the organization, but I think we are the conduit through which all of this flows through. Like marketing, and everyone's speaking a different language, and everyone has a different understanding of what their goals and objectives are, right? Like, and to go from like ticking off a marketing objective and ticking off a strategy objective to actually operationalizing it is where we sit in between. So I would never say that sales is more important. So let's just make sure that we line up with sales. In fact,
so pause. Yeah. I did not say sales was more important. I said sales was important, and that you personally said, I'm going to go focus on that piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So focus on that piece of it to make sure that it works. So it works with less friction, because sales guys love to sell. They don't want to be bothered with internal politics of what happens with product, or what's happening in supply chain, what's happening in marketing. They want to basically know, hey, Karan, how can I sell more? How can you support me to sell more? How can you support me with pricing strategy in terms of making sure that I can actually have some, as let's say, spine in my pricing? How do I have that? And can you create that for me? And can you make sure that when I go sell and I close a deal at the right price that we all agreed to, then can you make sure that we actually have the product to support it? So that's where our sort of role sort of lies in between.
Yep.
I feel like, and that I feel is a little bit better than just pricing, right? Because now you got more skin in the game across different. Because one of the things that happen when you're solely pricing is that you're solely pricing. You are either towards, if you're a good pricing organization, you are at the start of the organization where product is going to be created, but you're going to have pricing input to it. But in bad pricing organizations, pricing is going to be in the end, where they're just going to come to pricing and say, hey, where's my price sheet? After everything has been done between product and finance and sales and everything's going to be like, where's my price sheet? And I think that is the bad word that we don't want. We want a world where pricing can have more say in all of these places. And I feel like sales operation is a good way to sort of have that voice with different people. And I think that helped tremendously in knowing what sales wants, understanding what they want, what they can sell, what the capabilities are, and then working with the rest of the organization to make sure that we all align on what we're doing in terms of pricing, sales, pricing, discounting, channel strategy. So it's
okay. I have to ask this question because you may have said this, you're hinted at this. Are you still running pricing inside your company? And if so, I think that's amazingly brilliant to have pricing inside sales enablement.
Oh, yeah.
Because what that says is that salespeople will listen to you more because you're there to serve them.
Yeah.
And the rest of the company will actually listen to you more because you're closer to the customer. And you're not just this guy out in the middle saying, hey, I'm in pricing.
Yeah. And that's why I say, right, like pricing teams need to get to open up the horizon of what they're dealing with. And I think when you're only doing pricing, that's where you get that bad rep that, hey, pricing, because I've worked in purely pricing teams. And guess what the feedback was? Pricing doesn't know the customer. Pricing doesn't know the competition. Pricing can get on a sales call with me and sell. And I'm like, we took into account a lot of that when we were pricing a product, but maybe we still need to do a better job. But it was only when I started to get closer and closer to sales in a way. And a lot of people don't like that because they think I'm sleeping with the enemy, but actually I'm not. I'm actually getting more out of that relationship than I've ever in my career, because now pricing know that, okay, I'm a key part of their it's no longer like, hey, a price sheet person. It's actually someone who's crafting the strategy. I'm the one who's going to make their life easier. And the way I do that is actually in my product life cycle, in my product roadmap and how we create products, we make it a point early on. At the same time, when we are deciding the product, what are we going to make, what the price we're going to charge, what's the consumer research behind it, what willingness to pay and what conjoint and everything. We do that. And at the same time, we try and get some feedback from the sales guys as to, hey guys, this is what's going to be created. This is going to be the value. This is how it's going to come out. This is the prices this is the tentative prices that you might see. Tell us what's your first thought. And that doesn't mean they get to lower the prices, because that's still that's my area of responsibility. But at least I know what the pushback will be when I go to market with them, so I can prepare for that early on. Because a lot of people think when I start talking to sales, hey, they're just going to ask them to decrease the price. But actually, sales guys don't want to decrease it. I think there's a bad notion out there that sales just want to decrease the price. Yeah, sure, it makes, like some sales guys always want to decrease the price because that's the lowest common denominator that you can work with the customer. But I think most often they just want to sell. And if they can maximize their value and their commission and their compensation based on that, they'll do anything to make it happen. And that's where I think a lot of people go wrong. So we bring them into that conversation. We get their feedback. We try and incorporate that back into the product feed to basically say, hey guys, this is what the feedback from the field is. How can we either incorporate it, or if we don't want to incorporate it, how do we talk about it in terms that they understand, and then they can actually talk to the customer and say, hey guys, this is why we didn't do that, what you asked for. So we actually own pricing inside sales operation here. And
I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's been fantastic.
That's really cool. So I'm going to make a quick observation just because I think it's funny. You've probably heard pricing teams called the sales prevention team.
Yeah.
And so now we have the sales prevention team inside the sales enablement team.
Yeah, it's funny, right? This was always the case, right? Pricing is a no person. They can go on the call. They can talk to the customer. And that's where it came from, because they were like, hey, if you're just going to object to anything and I've done, the only way to prevent that is you should have talked to me before. And I'm like, sure, let's do that now. We're going to talk to you before, so we understand your issues, and that when you go to market, we can actually give you the ammunition to actually attack that. Whether that's customer intel, whether there's competition intel, whether that's just analytics, we'll give it to you.
Yep. Cool. I often say the words, if your salespeople ask for discounts too often, it's because you haven't given them the tools, knowledge, and confidence that they can win at the prices you think they should be winning at.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. I think it's just, I sort of think of it as a flow chart. If something is not working right and you're over discounting, it's either your product doesn't have the value, right? Or you're lacking value statements that they can actually link with the product, or sometimes it is overpriced to value, which can happen. I've worked in case in the past where we were overpriced to the value we deliver, and we sort of had to bite and bullet and say, hey guys, okay, maybe this is a reality check. The value is not here, it's here. So our willingness to pay needs to be somewhere around here as well, so that we can actually make it all work. Because sometimes and that's where it is like, we can't sit in an ivory tower and say, hey, prices can only go up, and this is the way we price. At the end of the day, it's like, I guess a lot of people will get triggered when I say this. It's guesswork with framework, right? It's not guesswork, but it's guesswork with framework in a way that there's no one perfect price. If you can tell me a product that had one perfect price, and I will tell you, hey, why they're underpriced or overpriced. But you need the framework to measure that, to basically make sure that, hey, whatever you have in price, either it's working or it's not working. And how do you have the framework to support that is all up with pricing team's responsibility. Like there was a time when I would sweat before a product launch, like 6-7 years ago. I'm like, hey, hopefully we did all the research and everything is fine, but research and reality could be so much different. And I used to fret about, hey, did we underprice? Did we overprice? Now I don't care about that anymore. I'm like, hey, we're going to launch in the market with a price. We're going to gauge a response. If we feel like we have a product life cycle, we have a price, and I have a pricing life cycle. And if we feel like, hey, we are underpriced, we're going to take our prices where we think the value is over time. If we think we are overpriced, we'll gauge that and we'll figure out what to do. Either that's basically, repricing, either that basically adding more value to the product so that it matches up, or is that targeted promotions or targeted some of other tactic that we would need to do. And by the way, I hate discounting in general, though, in B2B, not in B2C, but in B2B. That's a totally different topic. But so I think that's, so I don't worry about that price per se anymore, because I know with the right leverage with the customer and internally in the organization, I can move that needle.
Nice. Karan, we are running out of time. This has just been absolutely fascinating. But let me ask the final question. What is one piece of pricing advice you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
Start talking. The number one thing I didn't do for the first 5 years of my career, 6 years of my career, was I did not talk to other people. I sat in my ivory tower doing my price sheets and doing my analysis, and waited till the last moment to show it in a boardroom in an Excel file. And people would take it with a grain of salt and be like, "Hey, yeah, sure, this is nice. Okay, this looks like this is a good price. Okay, we'll talk about it." Blow up your pricing process. Just blow it up. If you inherited a pricing team, if you're a pricing manager or pricing director, if you inherited a pricing team and you said, "Hey, there are issues with our pricing that are historic," fix them now. Blow it all up and say, "Hey, map out all your touch points with your organization. Where do you talk there?" And don't come back and say, "Hey, there's actually no touch point. There's only sales touch point." No, this is just not possible. Map out your pricing touch points with marketing, supply chain, finance, everyone. And then figure out how your pricing should operate in the organization. Then start building reputation with that one influential leader in the org. Find that one influential leader that actually talks about margin, talks about doing the right thing, and does not always just talk about more sales. Find that person and then try and hitch your ride to that person. Get them to read more value story, get them to understand more pricing, and it will do wonders to how you increase your visibility in the organization. So,
absolutely fascinating advice. I have to say that when an early mentor of mine, he came in and took over a pricing team that I was part of. And I watched him go have one-on-one meetings with pretty much everybody in the company. Didn't matter who it was, right? And he's going to learn from them and figure out what their goals are and how he can help them achieve their goals. And it was the most wonderful experience because he talked to me about that constantly.
Oh yeah, 100%. Really That's what I say. Go find your touch points, and when you find the touch point, go figure out. Then talk to that owner of that area to figure out how exactly can pricing help. And we do this almost every day. I don't think so. We have one-on-ones with almost everyone in the organization all the time for that. So
yeah, nice. Karan, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
The best way to contact me right now is through LinkedIn. I post and publish a lot of stuff on LinkedIn on pricing. I try and basically give out everything that I've learned over the years. So that is basically the best way to learn to get in touch with me right now. So I'm trying to build my own audience there. So happy to have people reach out to me.
Excellent. And to our listeners, thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this, would you please leave us a rating and a review? And if you have any questions or comments about the podcast or pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact. Thanks again to Jennings Executive Search for sponsoring our podcast. If you're looking to hire someone in pricing, I suggest you contact someone who knows pricing people. Contact Jennings Executive Search.